Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm raising an issue today in our adjournment proceedings that I originally raised on December 3rd during question period. Almost a year ago, the UN Women issued a statement calling violence against women and girls the shadow pandemic. This should come as no surprise, and it should not have taken COVID to expose the ways our society perpetuates this violence. The data tells us that half of all women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. Approximately every 6 days, a woman in Canada is killed by her intimate partner. Despite decades of research and community activism across this country, violence against those identifying as women, girls, or two-spirit people persists as a manifestation of misogyny, objectification, and discrimination. Women from all walks of life are victims and survivors of various types of physical, sexual, and psychological violence inflicted by intimate partners, people they trust, often people they share their homes and their lives with. In 1982, MP Margaret Mitchell prompted a ruckus in the House of Commons that sparked national awareness of domestic violence. She told the House that 1 in 10 Canadian husbands regularly beat his wife. The male MPs erupted, laughing and shouting. She furiously replied, "This is no laughing matter." It has been almost 40 years, and things have changed in this House. No MP would laugh at that statement today. But not enough has changed in the houses of the women of this country. The violence persists. I know there is room for enhanced leadership from our federal and provincial governments. I think of the recent government-funded victim-blaming ad campaign in Montreal, where the image of a young girl with a bag over her head, as though it was her fault, sexually explicit images of her were being passed around by anonymous men and boys on the internet. This is unacceptable and adds to the hesitancy to report such abuses for fear of backlash. In my home province, a group of survivors of sexual assault have gone public this week, saying that they have been manipulated by the provincial government, their experiences and research being used as a way for the government to create the illusion of wanting to help. We need government leadership and allyship that goes beyond illusion. We know the statistics are worse for Indigenous women, Black women, queer, non-binary and two-spirited women, newcomer women, women with disabilities, and who are otherwise marginalized. Our approach must center on an intersectional lens to address the unique and specific challenges of those facing the highest rates of gender-based violence. I will use this opportunity to remind this government of their responsibility to put forward the action plan to address the findings of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. The challenges of COVID-19 cannot be an excuse for the delay. As I have outlined, the urgency has only increased, and we must respond. No more stolen sisters, no more bright lights snuffed out in the night. We need to act, we need a cultural shift. I believe it can start with leadership, and it starts with our generation here and now. As a mother of young boys, I teach my children to respect all people, to find the right language to address their emotions and talk about the ways they might be struggling. I talk to them about tough subjects, about the hard truths in this world, but I also teach them about the opportunity to change it. I empower them to do their part and trust their abilities. I am proud that my children are also young Indigenous boys, Wolastoq Gao, who will be encouraged to end gender-based violence, to lift up and protect the women in their community. I look forward to hearing the member opposite discuss the role their government can play in combating the shadow pandemic in Canada.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Rural Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank the member from Fredericton for her question and her comments tonight and her hard work and advocacy on this important subject. Since 2015, our government has been working to prevent gender-based violence, to address the root causes, and support long-term solutions. We've worked with women's movement and organizations on the ground who've been doing this work for decades, even when the government before us left them underfunded and undermined for 10 years. We know the experience and knowledge of these groups is so important. Ending gender-based violence doesn't happen overnight, but I can confirm that our government will continue to be collaborative, persistent, and committed to sustainable change. Thanks to the investments of our government in women and gender equality, 6 million people benefit each year. In 2017, we announced the first ever federal strategy to prevent and address gender-based violence, and by bringing together all federal efforts to prevent GBV. Think about that, Madam Speaker. It took 150 years for a federal strategy to be created, designed to prevent the end of GBV. Through the federal strategy, over $200 million has been invested to expand and align federal efforts against gender-based violence. Through that strategy, we have supported innovative projects and programming with a whole of government approach. Here's a few examples. developing a framework to address gender-based violence in post-secondary institutions, creating and testing innovative practices to prevent teen dating violence, supporting the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, addressing gaps in supports for Indigenous survivors of GBV across the country. Building on the foundations laid by the strategy, we're now working with provincial and territorial governments and with Indigenous leaders to advance the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence. A key word there, Madam Speaker, is national. In January, just a month ago, federal, provincial, and territorial ministers responsible for the status of women came together over a few days with a joint declaration, a commitment to a Canada free from gender-based violence. This is such a significant milestone. This plan will address root causes to prevent gender-based violence and ensure that anyone facing GBV has reliable and timely access to protection and services, no matter where they live. But our work does not stop there, Madam Speaker. We announced $22.4 million in new funding to organizations providing supports for at-risk populations, including survivors of violence, as part of the national strategy to combat human trafficking. And in December, we announced our government support of 63 organizations across this country engaged in this work. We're also actively working to provide crucial support to those most vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic. We're providing up to $100 million in funding for shelters, sexual assault centers.
Have to interrupt the member. We can't hear you. I'm sorry, we lost you.
Oh, am I back now, Madam
You are back.
Speaker?
I think you went on mute accidentally.
Okay, I'll go to the
One sentence before, yeah.
Okay, in December, we announced our government support of 63 organizations engaged in the work. We're also actively working to provide crucial support to those most vulnerable in the COVID-19 pandemic. We're providing up to $100 million in funding to shelters, sexual assault centers, and other organizations working to support those experiencing GBV at this difficult time. We believe strongly that by acting quickly, by listening to experts and advocates, and by engaging all levels of governments, working closely with our partners, and by investing in the most sustainable approaches, we'll be on track to end gender-based violence in all its forms. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm reminded of my experience in first-year university during orientation. I was given a rape whistle. I was shown the dark paths not to go down and told the stories of women who had come before me. Here's a thought. Instead of arming women with rape whistles, instead of removing responsibility from the perpetrators, how about we tell young women all the ways we will support them and focus on their safety, that we will educate them and their classmates about consent, that should any problems arise, they should not hesitate to contact authorities, that they will be believed and their offenders prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We don't say these things, and in many ways, we can't yet because of the ongoing failures of our system. How about we also direct fund organizations, particularly those supporting women fleeing domestic violence and those providing mental health services, meeting women with open doors instead of a lack of options? How about a guaranteed livable income so that women are not financially dependent on their abusers? I know that our generation has the power to put an end to gender-based violence. We require ongoing leadership and dedicated funding from this government to do it.
Well, Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. And I agree wholeheartedly with the member opposite. And I was so delighted to be in discussions with the federal and provincial and territorial ministers when education was such a vital part of that conversation. And it was how everything has to start at the beginning. We know that GBV is a pervasive problem, but we are working quickly and actively to end it in all its forms. And we all have to do this together. Since the early days of the pandemic last year, we've engaged over 1,000 individuals representing organizations in working in the GBV sector across the country and priorities and the next steps on that plan. That plan is going to be devised by people working with all levels of government from the ground up. We know that some people and populations in Canada are more likely to experience violence and many facing unique barriers and challenges that put them at particular risk of gender-based violence. That's why applying an intersectional lens to the development of the National Action Plan continues to be at the heart of all our efforts. And I commend the member opposite. She sounds like an amazing mom, and I'm glad that she's starting her young boys out right. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good night to my friends.